Bias in the Greek system. Just so that viewers are aware, the following slides go into discussion about sexual assault. What comes to mind when you hear the term Greek life? Maybe it's friendship and camaraderie, or the stereotypical college experience seen in movies like Neighbors with its frat stars. Maybe what comes to mind is the typical sorority girls clapping and singing door chants. Maybe it's guys chugging beer. Maybe it's girls chugging beer. But how often is what we think of multiculturalism, or academics, or is what first comes to mind to some sexual assault? First, let's discuss what we mean by the term Greek life. Greek life as a whole actually involves so many more groups and interests than just the stereotypical frat party image. Here you can see that there are so many councils dedicated to different cultural groups, hobbies and interests, academics, and many other things. The ones you can see highlighted in blue are the councils present on campus here at UCLA. Despite this range and versatility of Greek organizations, many of these councils are not what comes to mind when we hear Greek life. When we refer to Greek life in this presentation, we are referring to the social Greek letter organizations that are associated with the party culture of a predominantly white population. These organizations are usually associated with social elitism and a status of an exclusive membership that research has shown fosters potentially hazardous behaviors.
In a study done by Metzger in 2006, 202 university students of Greek and non-Greek affiliation were asked the probability of them extending group membership to persons of perceived different visual gender appearance, either average, extreme, or non-traditional. Average meaning they looked typically male or female, extreme meaning they looked hypermasculine or hyperfeminine, and non-traditional being that they were masculine females or effeminate males. The results found that there was a statistically significant bias in favoring perceived hypermasculine or hyperfeminine presentations over non-traditional presentations. The results were also significantly biased towards average presentation in comparison to non-traditional presentation. All in all, there is a bias against non-traditional gender presentations, leading possibly to greater recruitment of hypermasculine or hyperfeminine people into Greek life, or implicitly makes potential candidates try and fit the molds of these stereotypes if these beliefs are held. However, the study showed no difference in membership bias between the Greek and the non-Greek affiliates, leading any perception of what a frat boy or sorority girl should be like to be rendered untrue. The stereotypes of Greek life weren't formed because they specifically sought after a subset of people. People in general are biased towards congruent or hypercongruent gender representations. Fraternities and sororities have just been around long enough and have been through enough rounds of recruitment for these effects to be noticeable in this select group. In a study done by Fielder, Warrington, and Blaisdell in 1952, 26 well-acquainted fraternity students were asked to organize 76 descriptive personality statements, meaning statements that read, "I feel nervous and anxious in the presence of superior others," or sentences like, "I go on my own way regardless of the opinions of others." They were asked to categorize them into 8 different quantities: 1, 5, 2, 20, 20, 12, 5, and 1. Distributing the statements into a forced normal distribution where the most characteristic statement was at the first extreme and the statement that applied the least was at the other. They were asked to do this 4 times, once reflective of themselves, once reflective of their ideal self, once reflective of the fraternity member that they liked the most, and once reflective of the fraternity member that they liked the least. The results showed that subjects would perceive persons that they liked as more similar to themselves or their ideal selves based off of how they arranged the statements. However, when compared to the actual results of these persons, they were not significant, meaning though they perceived the persons to be similar to them and to hold the same traits, they actually didn't. These findings can possibly explain one aspect as to why sexual assault happens in fraternities. With implicit preference to hypercongruent gender presentation in group membership, fraternities possibly draw hypermasculine males or males looking to fit that role. When combined with the findings with the study by Metzger et al., fraternity members will assume that their personalities and therefore their actions will align with one another. This poses issues if one person feels that sexual assault is condonable, whether explicitly or implicitly, and thinks that they have the support of their brothers, Or, given the stereotypes of what hypermasculine men think of women and how they treat women, having men trying to assume such a role and possibly this being their ideal self and thinking it aligns with the group is also problematic.
When discussing the inherent gender inequalities within our society and how they are exemplified in the Greek system, it is important to look at some statistics. I'm sure you've all heard in college sexual assault prevention seminars or info sessions the glaring statistic that 1/5 of women experience sexual assault in college. That is a huge amount of women, and further research broke down the statistics between men and women, actually stating that 23.1% of females and 5.4% of males experience rape or sexual assault in college. While these statistics are overall for all college populations, not just Greek life, a study shows that sexual victimization occurs at increased rates at fraternity parties and that more than 1/3 of rapes reported on college campuses took place in a fraternity. So how do the inherent gender inequalities in our society permeate Greek life and cause this amplified sexually violent behavior? Jaskowski and Wiersma Maudsley argue that a framework of socialist feminism that institutional and sociocultural factors related to gender and class inequalities on college campuses are problematic and that they directly and indirectly contribute to the occurrence of sexual assault as well as overall tolerance of a rape-supportive culture. Their discussion from a socialist feminism perspective refers to the female experience of gender and economic oppression due to living in a patriarchal society. As discussed with regards to a membership bias reinforced with a group mentality, often members of fraternities possess a hypermasculinity, often displayed through an entitled attitude. A study concluded findings that suggest that fraternity subculture may be conducive to sexual violence against women, and that specific venues such as parties and events hosted by fraternities represent spaces of high risk. Members in fraternities often express these entitled and patriarchal behaviors, often behind an illusion of security in their membership-based group mentality. So how is this relevant to those not on college campuses? Recently this year, society has seen a spike in news stories coming forward regarding sexual harassment and assault. Through the Me Too movement, many victims have felt a new safety in sharing their stories and drawing awareness to this issue in our culture. The Greek system's membership biases that perpetuate an attitude of entitlement is allowing for sexual violence, but by recognizing these biases and how they are facilitating violent behaviors, we can combat this mindset in the Greek system to create a safer environment on college campuses and to foster appropriate behaviors in the students who will become active members in the workforce and society as a whole.
So here we're going to be talking about neurological mechanisms that are associated with biased behavior in Greek life. First, we're going to talk about the facial recognition pathway. And recent studies into the fusiform face area revealed that faces that are familiar to the individual will result in an increased activity in that area compared to faces that are unfamiliar. As shown in figure B, the monkey was shown a familiar face and an unfamiliar face. And what is interesting about the data is that there's a significant increase of activity in the higher levels of facial recognition. And there's also a significant increase in activity in the prefrontal cortex, which is associated with emotional processes and cognition. Therefore, this can be involved in biased behavior towards recruiting individuals that are more familiar to themselves in terms of facial characteristics. Another neurological system we took into consideration is the amygdala, which is involved in implicit bias towards racial outgroups. As previous studies have shown, is that there's an increase in activity in the amygdala when an individual sees another person outside their racial group. What is interesting about the study shown here is that the test group were shown faces of people within their racial in-group and faces outside their group, while conducting an fMRI test. And the results shown here is that in the first scan, there was relatively equal activation of the amygdala, but when they were tested again, there was a habituation of the activity in the amygdala towards faces of their in-group, while activity in the amygdala towards the out-group was relatively constant. This indicates another system is involved in regulating the activity of the amygdala, in which other studies have shown that the prefrontal cortex is involved in regulating this specific structure. Therefore, the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex may explain the cases of sexual assault on college campuses. Studies have shown that sorority members bias their perception to certain cues that indicate sexual aggression to be less active towards males that are associated with their sorority, such as fraternity members. In comparison to males that do not have any affiliation or any connection to the sorority girl, there is an increase in Miglia activity.
So how is UCLA combating these behaviors? UCLA recently has taken action against these issues with new IFC regulations that were catalyzed by a sexual assault arrest made during winter quarter of 2018. IFC, which stands for Interfraternal Council, is one of the many councils mentioned earlier composed of the social fraternities, and they put themselves on an indefinite ban while they compose new bylaws in order to better protect the students from these instances. They proposed new rules such as risk managers at each party wearing neon colored shirts so that they're obviously noticed by people at the parties. There's third-party security, third-party bartenders, ID checks, and each fraternity is required to have 3 sexual consent posters in their houses in visible view and in high-trafficked areas. And they also have to have food and water available upon request to any person at the party in order to prevent them from becoming too intoxicated. They came to a conclusion of these new rules that they are now enforced at all fraternity parties. And while many see these maybe as just a band-aid fix for a systematic problem, it is a step toward creating a safer environment for students attending fraternity parties and expressing intolerance of inappropriate behaviors.
As a psychology student and not a part of the Greek system, I think it's important for non-sensitive information about fraternities and sororities to be known to not just those who are interested in Greek life. To educate the masses on how Greek life actually operates could help the recruitment of more diverse individuals and in turn help break the stigmas and the issues related to membership bias. In terms of sexual assault, it's important to do more research on what works and doesn't work in terms of rape intervention. It has been shown that for college sexual assault interventions, that for the high risk group, the ones that are likely to commit sexual assault crimes, is actually makes them more reactive. It pushes them deeper in their ways. Peer education intervention could be one way of combating this by showing disapproval amongst peers and in groups.
As, me- as a member of a fraternity and a college student, I believe that there should be intervention methods to prevent these biased behavior from creating disparities associated with college students. Therefore, I believe the first step in debunking these biases is to make them aware of their implicit bias. I suggest that for entering college students, they should be given an implicit association test on subjects regarding Greek life and college. Therefore, their IAT will be able to make them aware of their perceptual bias regarding alcohol consumption among college students, cues regarding sexual interests, and their perception of what joining Greek life is really all about. By being aware that they have these implicit biases, it may prove to be influential in the choices they make while attending college.
We chose specifically to go into the membership bias and gender inequalities that perpetuate inappropriate sexual behaviors in the Greek system. This was not to exclude other prevalent biases within the system, such as racial bias, or how alcohol inhibition plays into the amplification of implicit and explicit biases in this context. As a member of a sorority myself and having seen these behaviors explicitly, I hope that UCLA will continue to find ways to create a safer environment within the Greek system. College students will party with or without a Greek system, and in place, I think this system, while although has bias issues within itself, can be used as a mechanism, as seen through the UCLA's IFC regulations, to control and regulate the partying culture and promote a more inclusive and safe environment.